So
Yeah.
let's zoom out for a moment.
Yeah.
So based on all your research and work, what do you think the advisor of 2040 needs to look like?
They need to be a therapist because initial research that came out 5 years ago from one, I think it was McKinsey, who's the advisor of 2030. And they very clearly stated that clients are going to want a highly personalized Netflix-like experience,
Mhm.
and they will want and primarily need their financial advisor for basically financial life coaching.
Yeah,
It's
I
no
think
longer the I'm going to talk to you once a year and say like your company is still you're still putting in your $300 a month. Great. See you later.
yeah. This is the Future Ready Advisor, a show about transforming your financial advisory practice. I'm your host, Sam Sivarajan, a wealth management consultant, behavioral scientist, and keynote speaker. In this podcast, I dive deep into the real challenges advisors face and bring you insightful conversations with top industry experts. Together, we'll explore practical strategies grounded in behavioral science to help you better serve your clients, optimize your time, and build a future-ready practice. Hi, everyone. I'm your host, Sam Sivarajan. Welcome to the Future Ready Advisor. Today, I'm joined by Lauren Jeffery, a registered psychotherapist, certified executor advisor, and doctoral researcher, who brings an interesting new perspective to the advisor-client relationship. Lauren started her career in compliance, helping firms navigate the regulatory side of financial services. But after a life-changing series of events, she took a different path, one that led her to psychotherapy, to working with some of the most vulnerable populations in society, and ultimately to redefining how we know our clients in financial services. Lauren, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Sam. I'm very happy to be here.
Well, I'm delighted to have you, and I think this is to me, it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart because I do believe it's one of the things that makes us invaluable to our clients is once you get to know them truly. So let's dive in. You've had a unique career path, as I described, from compliance trainer and educator to psychotherapist to academic researcher. Maybe you can share a little bit about how that journey unfolded and how it shapes the work you're doing with advisors today.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you alluded to in that wonderful introduction, the year was 2019 and it was a perfect storm of a lot of things, personally and professionally. And I had reached a crossroads where I'm not independently wealthy. I need to work, but I also need to work at something that fed me and nurtured me. And so I thought, well, I will become a psychotherapist. And so it was in the first class of my first course in my master's program, and I get called out by my teacher. And they say, we understand that you understand what you're reading, but how would you apply this in your real life?
Right.
And I'm like, well, that's an excellent question. Because I've just spent 25 years, as I used to joke with people, teaching financial advisors not to steal. But helping them navigate these really critical conversations. And now this academic is like, well, how does biopsychosocial theory fit? How would you apply that with your advisors? And we were talking about actually the therapeutic alliance, because we use psychotherapists today in Canada are taught first things first is biopsychosocial theory. And what this tells us is that every single person is the sum of their biology, so their physical body, and all that brings, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Their psychology, so this is not only how their brain functions, but the lessons they learn, how they choose to engage in problem solving, decision making, and all of that good stuff, as well as the social component, which is the people and places that you hang out in, where you work, where you live, where you play. So you are a sum total of all of those things. And so as a therapist, gaining insight into this through creating this therapeutic alliance, and this is the big tip off. The research tells us that the better the therapeutic alliance, the better the outcomes. And it's this that I go, that sounds kind of familiar. Advisors, it's all about the relationship with their clients. And so the better the relationship, the better the outcomes. So I start, and so I start having to write about financial advice giving because I have to apply it to what I know today. And this is what I know: financial advice in Canada. So this actually lends me to move and shift from becoming a full-time psychotherapist. So I currently run a very, very small practice by design, but I start this company, Point Shift, which is a practice management education company, because now I recognize that there's this critical intersection between financial advisors and the clients that they serve.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm doing research, and then behavioral finance comes across. And I'm like, oh, this is really interesting. Let's see what behavioral finance has to say. So I'm learning all about this. I'm like, yeah, this is really great. But how do you do it?
How do you apply it?
How do you do behavioral finance?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the School of Economics created this. So they did the math. So they tell us that there is financial reasons why we need to involve ourselves with our clients' emotions and biases and these other things, because there is a financial consequence to clients because they're making bad decisions around money because of these things. And I call them things because there's like 180 some odd unique biases. Behavioral finance only touches upon 10. So there's a greater human experience that's actually occurring. And so I'm learning all of this as I'm becoming a psychotherapist. So then, while I'm doing my doctoral work, my master's, I have to do a placement. So I have to now start actually becoming a psychotherapist. At this point in my journey, I know I don't want to be a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday psychotherapist. So I get myself a job in a transition house in Toronto called Alpha House. And it's a transition house for men recovering from substance abuse who are trying to transition back into the community.
Mm-hmm.
So I start working, and it's during the height of COVID when all of Toronto is locked down. So I'm locked in a house with 18 grown men, I think about half who had been paroled out from the prison system. And so I now am hanging out and talking with these men, trying to help them reintegrate back into society. Well, this also brings up a whole new set of questions. What do I know about a guy who's been homeless for 25 years? Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
What do I know about the 18-year-old kid whose mom got him hooked on crack? Nothing. What about the kid from Forest Hill whose parent, you know, had big houses, big money? So I'm now seeing all sorts of life. And
Mm-hmm.
how do we navigate through that? And so I start asking these critical questions of men, and Point Shift comes to be at the dining room table of Alpha House with these men. And so I start, and this is where my KYC model comes in, because I know we're not asking the right questions. Because one of my clients is an ophthalmologist. So, how does an ophthalmologist go from living a really great life, living in a high rent neighborhood, to being homeless from an 18-year opioid addiction?
I think those are bang on. To your point, it's such it's coming from a different sphere, as you say, like in that kind of transition phase. But the parallels to the financial advisory space, to me, are right there to see, right? And I would think that the audience would agree with that. You are, as an advisor, you're talking to people that you don't have a complete picture of their, and I love this biopsychosocial framework. You don't have a good understanding of their health or living situation. You don't have a good understanding of their psychological biases, preferences, or any of those. And you don't have a good knowledge about their social circumstances. And that includes the experiences that they've had that have defined them, whether with money or with significant others or what have you. But I think, to be a holistic financial advisor in today's age, you need to have that, your foot in each one of those three areas to get a better picture. And I think what you're talking about, I know that many people would balk at the characterization of this as therapy, but in a lot of places in the US, there are a lot of institutions now that are actually offering accreditation in, it's called financial therapy, right? And
Yes.
I don't think that's a bad way of looking at it, that, the advisor of the future, in my mind, would be that element of, it's going beyond what we used to call a coach. I think that's an important element, but that therapy element that you're talking about, I think that's critical.
Yeah. And so not only are we, as you said, starting to see these different accreditations and institutions, but it actually goes far, it's far broader than that, because you actually hit the nail on the head with like the appetite to have this discussion. I just talked to an advisor a few months ago, and they were like, I don't want to talk to my client about their divorce. And I'm like, what?
I don't-
And they're like, I don't want to get involved in it. And I'm like, well, you're not getting involved in it. You're asking him how he's doing. Oh, he's fine. And I challenged him and I pushed back. And I was like, like not doing a good KYC update. That didn't go over well, but this is what needs, because there's ego.
No, look, if I can, I totally
Yeah.
agree with you. And that this is, I might even go further than to say, leave aside the KYC element of it, and because I agree with
Yeah.
that. But if you are trying to build a deeper relationship, look, I get that it's uncomfortable, but the question I would ask myself in that situation is, if this was one of my friends, okay, one of my close friends, or somebody that I've got a more than a passing relationship, how would I interact with them in this similar type of situation? And if I was in that situation, how would I want my friend to interact with me?
Mhm.
And I think, to me, an advisor, it's not that you're going to be a friend to your clients, but if you are more than just processing transactions, if you want to have a valued relationship, a trusted relationship, there's got to be some emotional involvement. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to have them lying on your couch and they're going to tell them all about your childhood and everything else, but you have to show some real, genuine, authentic interest in their lives and the things that matter. And in this case, I think, as you're talking about, the person that has gone through a divorce, I can't imagine that this is not something that's on that client's mind, almost 24/7. And for you to not acknowledge it, for you not to talk about it, for you not to be empathetic about it, I think that's not just a missed opportunity. I think you're actually hurting the depth of your relationship with that client.
Well, consequently, the client just cashed out.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, you know, so I think there's so much tabooism around, right? And especially because of the demographics that we work with our financial advisor base right now, we
Mhm.
still sit primarily in that 51% of, white men over 50. Like we're still, and we raised a whole generations of men who were told to be strong, who were told to, this is not emotional, you need to detach,
Yeah.
which is complete bunk,
Yeah.
as you know. And so we are suffering the consequences of that, because now it's actually become, it's now an entry in the DSM. We have something called financial advisor anxiety, or the FAA, which is a lot like white coat syndrome.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And so for those of you who don't know what white coat syndrome is, like your blood pressure goes up about 40 points. I'm one of those people when you walk into a doctor's office,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So people are having this same response when they're walking into a financial advisor's office. And
Interesting.
if you're ignoring that, then you're not upholding your duty of care. Because really what a lot of my research keeps coming back to is, like, the client's always at the losing end of everything because of an unwillingness or inability, whether they don't know, they don't care, they're not comfortable, they don't know how to actually say, like, man, are you okay? And to not be scared about what comes back, because when we are respectfully curious about somebody else's life, that's a big green flag, to use today's vernacular.
Mhm.
That one small question
Mhm.
can shift a whole relationship, because you've just showed somebody you care and you're putting somebody else's needs ahead of yours, which you should be doing as a financial advisor anyway.
I think you're
Mhm.
absolutely right. I would say that in my experience that most advisors genuinely care and want to be in that position that they can support their clients
Agreed.
even in these elements. I think the challenge is, as you rightly put it, that we've been taught to focus on the technical, we've been taught to focus on the objective, that there is a degree of discomfort to get into things that they believe are perhaps too personal or they don't know how to handle it. And that this segues into one of the questions that I wanted to ask you is that, look, that most advisors are taught to ask the questions, the hard data questions that they need to ask in order to get the information that they need. And this is very much in the KYC, the form filling and everything else that you have to do, which is an important element of the practice. But I've always believed that the magic happens in the follow-up questions and the silence. I remember talking to a veteran advisor who shared with me that he has his usual intake form for his clients with all the questions, etc., but that the real value in that intake form is on the back up pages, etc., because he's just jotting down notes as the client is talking instead of I've got question 2, then it's question 4, etc. Now, from our conversation, I think you share that belief that this follow-up questions, that silence, letting the client kind of sit there and reflect on things that they might not have reflected before. What advice would you give advisors on, to put it crassly, how to become better listeners and perhaps ask questions, as you say, from a place of curiosity and not control?
So I love this question because it's, especially with financial advisors, because it's so complex, right? Especially that control piece. To become a better listener, you just have to stop and listen. That means putting your phone away, putting your pen down, just listening to them and not letting your mind, and it's really an act, and it's a skill that is learned, and it takes practice. Even as a psychotherapist, you'll see me at times like biting my knuckle because I just got to keep my mouth shut, but I'm like, and so, but you learn, because, and especially in today's day and age, there's a million ways that we can capture technology and data. And so I always say that the questions are there to shine light on the liminal space. Because for me, that's where life and living really happens, is in that liminal space. And that is in the questions left unanswered, how the questions are answered, the silence. But we also have to give our clients space. And that space is the silence. Silence can be uncomfortable, right? But uncomfortable doesn't mean scary, bad, dangerous.
Right.
It just means we've hit a conflict that we don't understand, or we don't have an answer to something. And when we speak to the form, because that's sort of my thing, is we teach advisors to speak to the form, because you need to get the paperwork and the compliance piece through. And so we don't give them the space and the opportunity to actually reflect. And so this whole notion prompted me to create, this is what helped me create Where You At, my online questionnaire, the KYC tool, right? That you can send to your clients. They're going to answer 24 questions and 24 scenarios or situations about their current life today. And you, as an advisor, get 24 questions back. These are all questions that I ask. And so it gives you an opportunity to have that conversation about, listen, what are you struggling with today? Like, is it your family, or is it money? Or is it because your family needs a ton of money? Because all of those things are very unique and distinct things in a person's life, right? It's the silence, it's the liminal space, it's all of that contextual stuff that comes up when you ask different questions. Instead of, how old are you, Sam? 29. Oh, thanks.
I'm not for the
The last time I tried to actually say that, honestly, I was really wrong. So I always like, but you get what I'm saying, right? Like, so when we just like speak to that form, we don't understand that at 29, you've already had all of these life experiences, whether it's a tragic loss of parents or a sibling, or losing money and access to schooling, because you had to drop out, right? Like, you just don't know what brings people to today.
Yep.
And most people don't even know what today looks like for them, which is what prompted this Where You At questionnaire. Because, the first thing I say to my psychotherapy clients, and even actually my practice management clients, we just got to stop for 24 hours. Let's just stop the crazy, stop the noise, and let's just breathe. And then let's talk about what's going on, because everything comes at us so fast. Time is money.
No,
Produce. Yeah.
I think it's very powerful what you said, to your point that the silence, we're not used to it. And yes, it could be conflict. I do think that the type of questions that you're talking about the ones that are not filling the form, right? That are easy,
Mm.
that we know the answers to. They're deeper and they require reflection. And for a lot of clients, when you're asking that deeper question, they're questions that they might never have been asked or that they've asked themselves. And the silence isn't that it's uncomfortable because we make it uncomfortable, because we think, especially as financial advisors who are type A and that feel like
Mm.
that they're the expert and that they have to have an answer for everything, we're uncomfortable in that situation thinking that we have to fill that silence. But the client isn't offended or anything else. They're actually just thinking, right? And to your point, like, leave them the space to think it through and let them come up with an answer. And I think one challenge, I'd be interested in your thoughts. One challenge is that because it feels like 10 seconds or 5 seconds of waiting feels like forever, and because we're in a rush, because we have only limited time and we have to produce, etc. I think as soon as that client ultimately gives the answer, we move on to the next question, etc. And I think the real magic, in my experience, is asking the next question, right? Like, I mean, when I say next question, about the answer that they just gave, etc. Dig deeper, because it might be the initial thing that they come in, and you want to test it to say, okay, let me make sure I understand. Is this what you mean, etc.? Or can you give me an example of how that kind of thinking is applied lately, or something like that, or how that has changed over time? And this isn't questions for the sake of questions or conversation. You're actually kind of asking the client to reflect on it, to make sure that that you understand as an advisor, but B, that you're making sure that the client themselves understands the nuances of what they've said, right?
Because oftentimes that's the first time the first time the advisor's hearing it is also the first time the client's heard it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that is what I like to say to a lot of people is when clients come to us looking for help, oftentimes they bring us their peanut butter sandwich problem. So peanut butter sandwich is your kids come home and every day you make them a peanut butter sandwich. So your kids come home, so you make them a peanut butter sandwich. Your kid melts down because you didn't cut the crust off, which incidentally you haven't done ever, right? So is the problem really about the crust, or is it that your kid fell on the playground, got yelled at by the teacher, their best friend said something mean, right? Like they just had a bad day. And it is our job as helpers, right, to actually find where we need to help. And if we just take the low hanging fruit, the peanut butter sandwich, like then we get caught up in this like spiral of nothingness that never resolves itself. The client's still resentful. You're not going to see any traction because the client's not doing what
Yeah.
you are proposing, right? Because you're talking about the peanut butter sandwich.
I love
But
that, Lauren. I love that analogy.
thank you.
It's wonderful.
Thank
No,
you.
I think you're absolutely right. It's like we're solving the surface issue and not the deeper problem, right? And it's easy to do that because it looks like we're problem solution, right? It's the hammer and nail story, right? So like, if you have a hammer, if you approach, then everything is a nail, right? And I don't think that solves the problem.
Because your clients may be coming to you for financial advice, but it may not be financial advice about their retirement. They know they need retirement help, but the fact of the matter is they're struggling today. And if you don't have a handle on what's happening in your client's life today,
Yeah.
you can't help them anyway effectively about tomorrow because you don't understand what's happening today. Today is the predecessor to tomorrow, right? So,
Yeah, no, look, it's a great point. We live in the financial advisory space is unique in the sense that we have to help our clients balance the today with the future, right? They have to have a
yes.
plan and everything else. But I remember, like, there's always this question about, okay, if you're helping a client, for instance, on paying down debt, you know, there's what's the right debt? What's the debt that they should pay down first, right? And so there's two different models to that. The first model is, of course, you pay down the most expensive debt, right? The one that has got the highest interest rates, so say credit card or something like that. And look, from a pure technical financial point of view, that makes total sense. That is what you should pay. That's the most expensive debt that you have. But from a more behavioral, understanding the whole person point of view, it might actually make more sense for them to pay that small debt that they have, even if it's the cheapest debt that they have, because they've solved the problem today. They've built this kind of sense, self-awareness that they can, yeah, you know what? I can pay down debt. The impact of that, paying down that one small debt, even at a relatively cheap cost of debt, is monumentally more than paying down that more expensive debt, right?
So it's about small successes, small wins, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this also, you had asked about a few questions ago, you were asking about control. And a lot of control is wrapped up into this as well. And we don't realize, right? Because financial advisors also have this duality, right? They
Mm-hmm.
get paid to manage somebody else's money. So when they're managing somebody else's money, they're also acutely aware that their bottom line is impacted by this. So there's that element of control, right? Because you have to run your business. And
Right.
so, and then this also frames, and this is why control is such a big thing, because of how the system is set up. I think I went off on a bit of a tangent here, but control is a really big piece on both sides of the equation because of the personal nature of money.
No, I think that's
Okay.
fair. And so
Yeah.
your point is, if I can, I'm interpreting here. So obviously the advisor, by nature of it being a business, et cetera, and the fact that the client is coming to them for solution, there's an element that they feel that they have to exercise control, show control, et cetera. But are you arguing that the client also needs to feel that they have some sort of self-actualization and control in their own affairs, that this is their
Yes.
decision as well?
Yes. Because you're asking somebody to manage something that's very deeply personal to you, your life
Yep.
savings. And you're putting that faith, and that's a huge relationship. And I remember talking about this back in my teaching days. There was this article that used to always come up around the research about how Canadians spend more time looking for a financial advisor than they do a doctor or a lawyer,
Right.
right? And if that doesn't speak volumes, right, about the importance of this role, the fact that if financial advisors were deemed essential personnel during COVID, right? These people, financial advisors, have inherently a ton of power,
Mm-hmm.
right? And with great power comes great responsibility. And so I think this, and understanding that power dynamic that we have between our clients, right? Like all of this stuff goes into how we engage and how we treat, how we interact. It also informs our product
Mm-hmm.
selections, strategy. It's this wonderful, it's so, yeah, wonderfully complex. And it's been a really interesting place to work and to explore
No,
because they're so essential.
no, look, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, look, at the end of the day, it is a very human relationship type of business. And so your comment is a perfect segue to the talk about the importance of self-awareness, right? That advisors need to understand their own biases and emotional responses before they can truly serve their clients. I mean, you talked about it a bit, but maybe you can expand on that, why that self-work is so critical, not just for the advisor's own success, but for their interactions with their clients, and perhaps how advisors might start doing some of that self-work.
So another really great question. Do you know about social identity theory?
But for
Right?
the listeners,
So social identity theory is, typically it's something we learn about when we begin any academic research. And really it's about positioning the research to ensure that the data and whatever comes out of it is clear what the relationship. So to minimize bias and blind spots and keep objectivity, right? Which are all things that financial advisors need to be with
mm-hmm,
their clients, right? Because it's not about them, right? It's about their client.
mm-hmm,
And so, because we have this lack of self awareness, oftentimes researchers go through a social identity exercise. And so, really, what I say is the place that you speak from is the place that you stand. And what that means is, what does your citizenship tell about you? What does your gender speak about your decisions? What does, your political, your faith, your age, all of these things, your social class, what does this and how does this inform you with, as it pertains, I should say, to money? So I actually did with dynamic mutual funds. If listeners are curious, there is a CE webinar called Bridging the Gap, and where I talk about my doctoral research, and I take people through a social identity exercise, because this helps position you, right? What kind of political affiliation are you? Are you a liberal, or are you a hard right, hard left? Are you a radical, or are you just like, I'm pulling the covers over my head and I vote just because I know that's what I'm supposed to do? That is going to inform how you talk to your clients about, especially about what's happening in today's political sphere. You know, like if you're not political, you may have a problem with your clients that are freaking out, right? So how do you talk about that? Ask simple questions. How do you feel? What do you think? What keeps you up? What scares you? Simple questions, and then you just ask the question and sit back and listen. And so doing that self work is super critical. And just go through it, figure out, you know, are you a Canadian citizen? Were you born here? Are you a newcomer? Is this home? Or is this just a place you're staying until, you know, you get your PR? Like, people come here for all sorts of reasons. And it's, you know, you need to know why you're doing what you're doing. And that's all of this social identity work. But the quickest and easiest way is go on Dynamic, get yourself a compliant CE credit while you're at it, and learn about the place that you stand.
And by the way, this self-work or self-awareness is ongoing, right? Whether it's for your client
Absolutely.
or whether it's for yourself, because all of these things change over time. I mean, what you view, I mean, for example, look at what's happening right now. There are lots of snowbirds that thought that they were going to live in Florida for their whole retirement. In fact, they planned their whole working life and retirement around it. And now that they're rethinking it, right?
And that's all loss of identity as well.
Yeah. So I think that, like, look, circumstances are always going to dictate that our worldview on lots of issues, whether it's political, whether it's on social issues and other things. And that comes, I've learned this my own, in my own journey, is that changes partly as you grow older, but partly as your personal and family circumstances change, and is partly as external events are occurring that kind of impact your judgment. And to your point, it's important that advisors, have a good sense of self-awareness of all of those factors and how that it's impacting themselves. And part of that is to know how they may be portraying themselves to clients, but also to, I think, to be aware, if they're aware of it themselves, that those changes and how those are occurring, I think they can be more in tune with what's going on, or some of the levers or things that might be impacting the clients' lives, right?
So another piece of my work that I do, I'm also studying the social determinants of health and the relationship that money has. So the social determinants of health, there are like 12 things that like everybody needs to like live a good life, and that's housing, transportation, education, da 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 da. And so when you do this social identity and then you overlay it with these social determinants of health, this is what is going to inform your relationship with money. So one of the things in my research that I'm doing on financial advisors in Canada is I'm asking them all sorts of questions around money. What are their thoughts, beliefs, attitudes around money, work, and their life? Because those also inform. Some great research has been done by researchers out in BC analyzing Canadian advisors, both IROC and MFDA. I know it's all the one and the same now, but analyzing trades, and financial advisors' personal accounts look just the same as their clients. That's a problem.
It is. That's interesting. I'll just add to it, because that was a little bit of my doctoral research. And also, I've looked at the research. And I think the good news is, at least from everything that I've seen and I've seen, it's not that there's nothing nefarious going here that
No.
advisors are doing, etc. It is simply coming from, I think, a good place where advisors believe this is where I would invest my money today. And as a
Yes.
good advisor serving my clients in the best way possible, that that implicit thought is kind of translating into the way that they're recommending portfolios for their clients, for instance, right?
But the problem is, if you just assume that your clients share the same values, because this is what comes out of the research, is this whole like, well, my clients share my values, and I most assuredly don't share my
Right.
financial advisor's values, right? Not all of them.
No, I don't disagree.
So, but as a client, I expect my financial advisor to come at me with solutions that meet my needs. And so if they already have that in their head, that
Yep.
bias, that shortcut, it's not serving me
So
as a client.
so
And
I
it is to my detriment.
no, so I 100% agree with
Yeah.
that. So nothing I say is trying to
Oh, I know.
say that like, oh no, that's okay. I think that it's not okay. Client is coming because they have, from a KYC, it's perspective, it's not okay. From a client suitability perspective, it is not okay. From a long-term client goal achievement, it's not okay. All I'm trying to say here is that there isn't
Comes
something
from a
nefarious
place,
going on, but I think it ties back
1000%.
to your point that understanding this for advisors, understanding their that self-awareness of where their
Yes.
biases and how these things can play
Yes.
out is going to be
Yes.
critical from moving from the status quo to someplace more towards where the clients want and need it to be.
Yeah. And and the other neat thing is when we start shifting these conversations, a lot of other really great things happen because we provide opportunity, space, and options for other voices to be heard.
Mhm.
We struggle like with women in financial services. Well, why aren't women joining financial services? Well, there's a million and one reasons. I'm going to tell you right now, it's because the system doesn't work for us. And so when there is enough momentum and, I said this before, we only know what we know. And to your point, we're trying to do the best that we do. We can, but we now know that the system doesn't work as intended and life is changing and people are changing. The challenge is financial advice and financial services and how we teach advisors hasn't changed. We get the old guys that have already put in their 20, 30 years. They're not ready to retire for whatever reason, right? So we trot them out, we trot them across the country, do these road shows. They teach all these newbies all of their thing, all of their business tricks. How we did business 10 years ago even doesn't necessarily mean this is how we're doing business today because our demographics have changed, right?
Well, the market has changed, right?
And the market's changed, right? But we're not teaching them any differently. And so this is the disservice because my doctoral work is in education, right? And how we educate financial advisors. And so we're doing them a huge disservice,
No,
which
I think
then, yeah,
you make a great point. So let's zoom out for a moment.
yeah,
So, based on all your research and work, what do you think the advisor of 2040 needs to look like?
they need to be a therapist because initial research that came out 5 years ago from one, I think it was McKinsey, who's the advisor of 2030, and they very clearly stated that clients are going to want a highly personalized Netflix like experience,
Mhm.
and they will want and primarily need their financial advisor for basically financial life coaching.
Yeah,
It's no longer the I'm going to talk to you once a year and say like your company is still you're still putting in your $300 a month. Great. See you later.
yeah. No, look, I totally
Yep.
agree. So, Lauren, we're coming to the end of our podcast. So, I have a few rapid fire questions that I ask for all of my guests. So, if you're ready,
hmm
number one, professionally, what is the most important lesson you've learned over the years?
The pause to stop. 24 hours, don't do anything.
That's
Gets
good.
you out of a lot of trouble because when you respond without giving it some thought, bad things happen.
I
24 hours.
totally agree. Just as an anecdote, I can share that, like, I've, in my corporate days, I used to, you get an email and I draft a response and I would always set it in my draft folder for 24 hours. And so I've got it out of my system, but invariably I will go back and dramatically edit it before it
Yeah.
actually goes
Yeah.
out. So,
Ooh, can't say that.
yeah. So, number two, what is one practical tip you would offer listeners who want to better know their clients?
Be respectfully curious.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, it's being genuine and authentic, right? I mean, this is not, you're not prying, you're not being standoffish, you're not being unprofessional. I think being respectfully curious is a very nice way of putting it. Lauren, this has been a great, intriguing conversation. If listeners
so
want
much.
to learn more about your work or connect with you, where should they go?
LinkedIn for sure. I'm active on LinkedIn, and I'm building up my website so you can catch me there. And as things start to come out, I'll be sharing it more. But you can always find me on LinkedIn and on my website. There's always
Can you
good
share
stuff there.
your website domain?
Yeah, absolutely. It's www.point-shift.ca.
Awesome.
Point-shift.ca.
It will be in the show notes for everyone. Lauren, thank you.
Thank you.
This has been such a great conversation, and I think timely. Thank you for joining us today on the Future Ready Advisor.
Thank you very much for having me. I've really appreciated the conversation and the questions. Thank you, Sam.
My pleasure. In this episode of the Future Ready Advisor, I spoke with Lauren Jeffery, a registered psychotherapist and doctoral researcher who's redefining what it means to truly know our clients. Her unique journey from compliance training to working with some of society's most vulnerable populations has given her profound insights into the human side of financial advising. Here are my 3 key takeaways. Number 1. The biopsychosocial framework changes everything. Lauren introduced us to a powerful lens for understanding clients. Every person is the sum of their biology, their physical health and circumstances, their psychology, how they think and make decisions, and their social environment, their relationships and experiences. Most advisors focus heavily on the financial data while missing the deeper context that drives client behavior. When we understand all 3 dimensions, we can finally move beyond surface-level solutions to address what's really keeping clients up at night. Number 2, be respectfully curious, not controlling. The magic happens when we shift from interrogating clients with form-filling questions to being genuinely curious about their lives. Lauren's insight that the better the therapeutic alliance, the better the outcomes, applies directly to advisor-client relationships. It's not about becoming a therapist. It's about creating space for clients to think, reflect, and share what's really happening in their world. Sometimes the most powerful tool an advisor has is comfortable silence and a simple question. How are you doing? Number 3, the peanut butter sandwich problem. Lauren's analogy perfectly captures why so many client relationships stagnate. Clients often bring us their surface-level concerns, the peanut butter sandwich, when the real issue lies much deeper. A client complaining about investment performance might actually be struggling with a divorce, job loss, or family crisis. If we only address the stated problem without understanding the underlying context, we're solving the wrong equation entirely. Lauren reminds us that the advisor of 2040 will need to be part financial strategist, part life coach, someone who can navigate both the technical and deeply human aspects of money. The future belongs to advisors who can truly see and serve the whole person, not just their portfolio. You've been listening to the Future Ready Advisor. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or a rating on Spotify, or share your feedback wherever you listen. Be sure to follow the podcast so you never miss an episode. For more insights on how to keep your practice future ready, visit www.samsivarajan.com. You can find the link on the show notes. There you'll find free tools and resources, along with exclusive bonus content from these podcasts. Thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to sharing more strategies with you in the next episode.